is much more self-aware that it's just a farce, and is just trying to have fun with it. It's less about moving deck chairs in the plot, and more about just telling jokes. Speaking of which, the second reason why Kill the Alligator and Run is superior is because it has better jokes. I mean, come on, it was written by John Swartzwelder. There are gonna be good jokes in it. It has stuff like the MTV VJ joke, the I like that lady, Homer playing piano, I'm starting to dislike the man with the whip. A lot of the best stuff is actually the witty little remarks, like Homer not pulling over because there's no shade. If you've ever read one of Swartzwelder's hilarious novels like The Time Machine did it kind of contextualizes the humor in this episode. Like, this whole scene is utterly insane and is very different than the kind of thing The Simpsons usually does. I mean, they just got hit by a train and then decide to take a nap. Pretty bonkers. But ignoring the context of the series as a whole and looking at it as a screwball comedy on its own, and the logic of the joke works. Homer can go to the dining car, for example, because it is ridiculous, and that makes sense when using ridiculous Willy Wonka logic. If the characters in the scene weren't The Simpsons, no one would bat an eye at this joke. It's not the joke's fault the series is all hoity-toity serious about reality and stuff. Well, maybe it is a little. But the other episode, despite all those caveats and rationalizations, is still littered with mind-numbingly awful jokes. Like, take this one. Lenny says, no bag boy's gonna stop him from hosting a casual get-together. And then they pan over to Carl who says, casual? He's wearing a tuxedo! And then there's this one, which is probably the worst joke in the entire series. Bart is playing Safari Bingo and crosses out Warthog. He says, alright, I got another one. And Lisa says, hey, you didn't see a warthog. And Bart says, I'm looking at one right now. So Lisa yells, Mom, Bart implied I'm a warthog. To which Marge calls back, no one's a warthog. And Bart says, what about him? The joke is, there was actually a warthog in the car the entire time. The entire time. The warthog was in the car the entire time. This is literally the kind of joke they would do on Full House. Also Fuller House, I think. I don't know. The episode does have its share of good jokes in it, but for every good or even tolerable joke that comes along, it's followed up by something so weird and stupid that you wonder if a computer algorithm wrote it. Suitcase plus giant spider equals LOL. I've probably gone on for too long now, so I'm just going to leave the case for Kill the Alligator and Run right here. Ultimately, it's just a funnier episode to watch, and combined with the stronger Act 1, it ends up being a better package as a whole. But enough of that Florida stuff and that artist with a successful music career for 20 years. We've got a plane to catch. This is the case for Simpsons Safari. Simpsons Safari is an episode of The Simpsons where the family goes on a trip somewhere. And, unlike the other episode, it actually feels like an episode of The Simpsons. Everyone is written in character, the dialogue is realistic and natural, and the plot actually has structure. It's a weird structure to be sure, but at least we can say it's definitely there. The first reason why Simpsons Safari is superior is because the story is less incoherent. It is an episode in which the Simpsons go over Victoria Falls and then discover chimpanzees working in a diamond mine run by an unscrupulous scientist. It is still a more coherent story than Kill the Alligator and Run. Honestly, the story in Simpsons Safari is pretty typical by travel episode standards. A lot of it is the family going from location to location, taking in a bit of the culture with a few jokes thrown in. There are definitely weird twists and turns, like the hippo snoozing in the middle of a Maasai village, but overall pretty standard stuff for this kind of episode. There are actually some nice cultural moments in it, showing the beauty of the location and its people. And the diamond mine, while extremely ridiculous, I get what they're going for here as a funny concept. It has nothing to do with the rest of the episode, but in its own cartoon logic, it kinda makes sense. Kinda. And at least Simpsons Safari puts up the pretense of putting common threads throughout the episode. They set up the concept of poachers early on, and then fake us out later with the Greenpeace guys invading. They even jokingly keep referring to the Bag Boy strike from Act 1. It's almost like they made an outline before writing this episode. Kill the Alligator and Run, on the other hand, pulls an alligator out of its ass in Act 3. The alligator was alive, yada yada yada. As a comedy, I don't expect them to spend a lot of time justifying its own plot. This isn't a Christopher Nolan movie after all. But I do expect them to at least justify why the Simpsons are on the run from the law for half the episode. That is not such an unreasonable request to have. Just throw in like 1 or 2 lines explaining the misunderstanding. Like, the alligator was actually in critical condition during the trial. The alligator went missing. Someone just substituted a new alligator as the town mascot. Say something. The fact that they didn't suggests they didn't even care. How can they not care? and as silly as the diamond mine is, at least they care enough to explain it. Simpson Safari, the caring episode. Second, Simpson Safari is better because Homer is way more likable. This is a pretty important point. Homer has a big personality, and his general mood can really dictate the tone of an episode. Really, this point is less about Simpson Safari and more about the other example. Homer's role in this one is pretty solid overall. He has some cute moments at the grocery store and is super enthusiastic throughout most of the vacation in Africa. The only place where he falls into the dreaded jerk-ass Homer area is the way he treats the bag boys, but it is so brief and ultimately frivolous that it's not a problem. I think the difference between the two Homers can be identified by their musical moments. The Simpson Safari Homer is just singing along with the radio joyously, pretending like he knows what he's doing. Or he's getting into the Maasai dancing and running around hitting bongos. All these moments are light and fun and playful. In the other episode, you have Homer interrupting a Kid Rock concert, declaring all for Homer, and then proceeding to take over and sing "We Built This City." The whole "We Built This City" running joke trickles into the other musical moments, and it never really becomes funny or even absurd. The other characters are clearly tired of it. There is a problem in general with Homer taking every single moment overboard, smothering any sense of subtlety with an oversized pillow. After a while, I'm just pleading with him. Please stop doing this. You're not funny. It's just annoying. In my humble opinion, Homer has never been more tiresome as a character than in this episode. Or, to put it another way, Homer needs the GTFO out of K-Tar ASAP. Okay, thanks, bye. Simpson Safari avoids a lot of these problems, making for a much lighter and less oppressive attitude among its characters. To make a long story short, the tone is much more Simpson-y than the other episode. Sure, it may have a couple clunkers in its jokes here or there, but so does the other one. At least Simpson Safari doesn't insult the audience's intelligence or waste our time. It's just a silly travel adventure, nothing more, nothing less. Why would you vote for the episode where the characters look miserable half the time? Seems like a pretty open and shut case to me. So let's settle this once and for all and go to the verdict. Alright, I know which episode I originally ranked as my least favorite back in 2011, but I admit to going back and forth a few times when writing this review. For me, it really comes down to a case of an extremely uneven episode versus an extremely dull one. I find Kill the Alligator and Run to be the much more abusive episode overall, where it'll repeatedly just piss me off with its stupid plot points and character moments, but then it'll draw me back in with a couple funny moments or some actual rustic charm. Every time I try to leave, it convinces me to hang around. It's the 50 Shades of Grey of Simpsons episodes. Simpson Safari, on the other hand, I just find kind of boring and unfunny from start to finish. It has this constant layer of malaise to it, where they wander from place to place, littering obvious jokes all over the African plains. There isn't really a plot to speak of until Act 3, and while Act 3 isn't as insulting to our intelligence, it's hard to say that all this crazy stuff that happens in it is really that much better than the other episode. They're both utterly ridiculous stories, it just has fewer plot holes. I kinda want to pick neither episode here and go, ha ha ha, both are losers. It's the Angry Simpsons nerd. But that is so done already by now. So, if I had to pick only one of these episodes, I think I would go with Kill the Alligator and Run. Ugh. Maybe I just have a self-destructive streak or something, but I guess I can deal with that stupid alligator being alive the whole stupid time. Early on, there's literally nothing in this episode that indicates this isn't supposed to be a total farce. It's constantly dropping a bunch of red flags of, hey, don't take this so seriously. This isn't season 2 anymore, stop pretending like it is. So fine, you win, Mr. Alligator. At least you were surrounded by some good jokes that make sense in its crazy backwards Swartzweldian logic. You are better than an episode with no actual story, a bunch of uninspired jokes, and a diamond mine that comes out of frickin' nowhere. Actually, now I'm starting to think about it, it might be better than Codependence Day too. I like that. So that's where I ended up on this one. Kill the Alligator and Run is somehow the superior episode. Do you think I made the right decision, or should I have gone in a different direction? Maybe I'm being too mean to both episodes and you think there are far worse ones. Let me know in the comments, I'm curious to hear what you guys think. But for now, this case is closed. And let us never speak of this again. This is Krusty the Clown, real name Herschel Kristofsky. He is the most popular children's entertainer in Springfield. The kids love him. He's been entertaining them for something like 60 years now. His material for adults? Well, it's not quite as good. Despite being a clown, Krusty is not a happy individual. He has a very complicated history with his father and his own faith. He has a daughter he barely ever sees. He has a history of gambling, womanizing, and putting his name on crappy merchandise. He is generally terrible with his money, losing everything frequently, and regularly quitting show business or being fired. And yet somehow, Krusty does not come off as being the most terrible person in Springfield. Thanks, Mo. He creates this weird blend of total enthusiasm and complete indifference that is so compelling to watch. This is the history of Krusty the Clown. Krusty the Clown is probably the most unique character in the show's history, in terms of his presentation and his character development. When you think of him, he feels very actualized as a character right from the start. Krusty is always Krusty. He's not like Nelson, who's softened up or changed over time. Krusty has always been that lovable rogue, right from Season 1. He has the honor of being the very first secondary character who gets his own spotlight episode. We get a sense of who he is right away. From Season 2 onward, it was all about tweaking and expanding upon his archetype. Let's go back to the very beginning. Krusty's first appearance was in a Tracy Ullman short, where the kids attend one of his tapings. After that, the actual series itself plays it very cool with Krusty in terms of his actual involvement in plots. He's sort of a background institution. His picture is seen in episodes like Homer's Odyssey and Bart the General. He's just kind of a thing, part of the setting and fabric of Springfield. His first actual speaking role is in The Telltale Head. We see the flashback of him distressed about the theft of Jebediah Springfield's head. Just a kids show host right now, just a concerned citizen of Springfield. Then we get Krusty Gets Busted, the episode where he really gets defined as a character. Look how much gets established right here. His developing relationship with Sideshow Bob, his relationship with Bart, his show's relationship with Itchy and Scratchy, the sheer amount of merchandising he has done, his heart attack, his illiteracy, his gambling. All of this is brought into his character. This episode is more or less an introduction to these elements, however. They don't portray his gambling as an addiction, they don't portray his merchandising super cynically. We do get a ton of crappy merchandise jokes in the future, like Camp Krusty was all about this angle, but for now, this is just the introduction. Then in Seasons 2 and 3, they start pulling on these threads. They show off his business ties to Roger Myers and Itchy and Scratchy and Marge. They have him become a total shill for Mount Splashmore and Brush with Greatness. Now! They even have him angrily field questions about the water park fiasco and the tainted Krusty brand mayonnaise. We start getting jokes like the Krusty hotline and Stark Raving Dad in Season 3. And then we get Like Father, Like Clown. I would argue this is really where Krusty gets fully formed as the character we know and love today. They bring in his backstory with his father and Judaism. Most importantly, though, it brings in a level of sadness to his character that we hadn't quite gotten yet. It's mostly been adult-themed content and general cynicism. Here's where we learn that Krusty is kind of a miserable person, that he drinks and womanizes because there's a lot of pain there. This is a very natural direction for this kind of entertainer character to go. There is the stereotype of the sad clown, the children's entertainer, or the stand-up comedian who is unhappy and jaded. The entertainment business is very stressful, very competitive. It makes a lot of sense that the occupation of always smiling and always being on will take its toll on someone, especially when they have unresolved personal issues. As a result, we see a pattern with Krusty-focused episodes. Krusty self-destructs, does something terrible, and usually redeems himself in the end. You look at how far back he slides when he gets cancelled, how fat he gets, only to take it all back in the end. He'll gamble away his daughter's violin, and then sneak into the mob's hideout and get it back. Even the modern episodes are like this. The Princess Penelope episode did it twice, actually. He gets depressed about girly stuff, then he gets together with her. He breaks it off at their wedding, but then returns to her in France in the end. A similar thing happens with his agent in Season 23. The only episode that doesn't really follow this pattern is The Last Temptation of Krust in Season 9. In that one, he refuses to sell out, but then sells out anyway because the Canyonero is awesome. But in general, Krusty's episodes tend to be kind of like Moe's: cynicism, self-destruction, followed by a somewhat uplifting ending. At least by Krusty's standards. That being said, Krusty as a supporting character tends to be black comedy and black comedy only. Think about Bart Gets Famous, where he's clearly taking advantage of his popularity and then shuts the door on Bart in the end. Or Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie, that ends with him celebrating Poochie's death. Or in Yokel Chords in Season 18, where he's clearly exploiting Cletus's kids. He's obviously not an uplifting character in support, he just shows up for an entertainment joke, a degeneracy joke, or if the plot needs a token Jew. After introducing his Jewish heritage and upbringing, it mostly stays in the background. Krusty's faith doesn't define his character or anything, but they do develop an arc around it and his father. In Season 15's Today I Am a Clown, Krusty finally has his bar mitzvah. It's an episode less about his relationship with his dad, it's just more of an attempt to do something with this aspect of Krusty's character. Rabbi Krustovsky passes away in the premiere episode of Season 26, a very shocking death that no one saw coming. This one was more or less a sequel to their first episode, this time Krusty questioning if his father actually found him funny. It doesn't really add anything new to their dynamic, they already kind of accepted each other for who they were, but it did give Krusty some closure, I guess. His dad appears in a dream sequence in Season 28, after Krusty temporarily converts to Christianity. It's honestly a pretty forgettable cameo. This was also the episode where his daughter Sophie comes back, even though Drew Barrymore doesn't reprise her role. To be honest, they really try to cram Krusty into a Christmas episode, and the whole thing comes off as kinda arbitrary and weird. I don't know about this one. Sideshow Bob is obviously the other major relationship for Krusty. During their early years, it's fun watching the writers go back and forth on these two together. First having them reconcile on TV and go to Bob's wedding, then Krusty voting for him, but then Bob tries to kill him in Season 7. After that, whenever they bring back Bob, they try to add a little wrinkle to the dynamic. We get to see Krusty reject Cecil and hire Bob. Then in Day of the Jackanapes, they reconcile for real this time, in a somewhat confusing bait and switch. Krusty is mostly indifferent to the Sideshow Bob era, which is, to be frank, totally in character for him, but then gets kinda nostalgic in his final show and gives a tribute to Bob. Okay, sure. But to the show's credit, they've pretty much stuck to this change since doing it. The two hang out together in Wedding for Disaster, and Bob even attends Rabbi Krustovsky's funeral. Aww. This is where I talk about Krusty's relationship with Bart, but Krusty barely even remembers who he is. So instead, let's visit the Krusty the Clown show and its various machinations. As a whole, it's been portrayed fairly consistently as purely a kids show, one with little skits and pranks and sideshow male abuse. They do a couple specials early on, where it's more of a primetime talk show thing. The format change is explained pretty well in universe. The weirdest episode, in terms of portrayal, is Bart Gets Famous, where now Krusty seems to be doing a sketch show for adults with discerning tastes in comedy. They kinda have to do this to make Bart's I didn't do it thing go mainstream. It's just weird they didn't clarify this as a late show or something. They actually combine the two types of comedy together in a later episode, where Krusty basically does a nostalgia show for adults. This joke has aged very well, by the way, in today's pop culture environment. Now, in terms of Krusty's actual history, that's been retconned and affected by the floating timeline pretty significantly. But you can kind of piece together his history in show business through clips and flashbacks. First, he was a street performer in Tupelo, Mississippi. Then he got his first TV appearance on the Milk of Magnesia Summer Cavalcade in 1957. In 1961, he was doing a serious talk show, interviewing everyone's favorite AFL-CIO president, George Meany. In 1963, he started clowning a little more, this time on Robert Frost, who said no. Around this time, or maybe in the 50s, he had a group of kids with him called the Krusketeers on his show. The 1970s brought us Sideshow Raheem, his experimentation with psychedelic drugs, and his appearance on Laugh-In. Honestly, we get a lot of little glances of his shows through the 60s through 90s, with him aping whatever was popular at the time. We shouldn't forget his interruption of his show in 1982, when the Falklands had been invaded. I repeat, the Falklands had been invaded. And then there's his ill-fated Krusty Burger contest in the 1984 Olympics. And finally, he does a USO show in Iraq during the Gulf War in the early 90s. The strangest retcon to Krusty's past happened in Season 23's The 10% Solution, where they show young adult Krusty doing stand-up. It's his first manager who convinces him to move into clowning. Up to that point in the series, he had consistently been portrayed as being into clowning from a young age. You could argue that maybe this is a gap in his adult history, where he initially struggles, temporarily gives it up, and then returns to it. Maybe the writers changed their mind. Who knows? We also tend to see Krusty without his makeup in these flashbacks. According to Krusty, this ain't makeup, which implies that his heart attack caused his skin to naturally look pale. The writers have basically stuck with this since then. We do see his yellow skin as Rory B. Bellows, but then it's revealed to actually be yellow makeup. The big point of contention with this is his Season 1 episode. It kind of feels like the writers changed their mind on this aspect in the Merkin era, and then Oakley and Weinstein and later showrunners just kind of went with it. In my opinion, Krusty doesn't wear makeup, but I can see why people would say that he does. The main thing with Krusty is that he's an opportunity to do jokes about show business. That's really his bread and butter as a character. He shows up a lot in the Itchy and Scratchy episodes, either as a consultant or being completely abandoned by them. The writers are especially fond of watching Krusty bomb in almost every format possible. I feel like this is one of his most interesting.
son? Velmi Ardred. Velmi Ardred. Velmi Ardred. Gachael Helmadilka.
Divolem, matmas, Gio.